on our economy is much discussed in these halls. There is a silly debate about which has created more impact on the American workforce, globalization and trade versus automation and innovation. The answer, of course, as in so many other things, is both and. But the reality is that the effects of automation and innovation are there for all to see. I imagine that very few people today are going to travel agents to book their travel. Booksellers have come under tremendous pressure. You don't go to Blockbuster Video anymore or a Borders bookstore. My own grandfather worked for a company called Eastman Kodak, which in its day had 150,000 employees. And of course now, in 2012, it was forced to declare bankruptcy. Clearly, we cannot underestimate the impact of automation and innovation, the impact that it's had on the workers in our economy, but we also can't broadly paint these innovations as simply good or bad. A topic like automation and innovation demands a nuanced conversation, a thoughtful dialogue, and a wide range of perspectives to truly understand it. I was moved particularly, I had the opportunity to visit a BMW plant in Munich. This plant was hundreds and hundreds of meters of robots producing BMWs, and what struck me most about that, apart from the visual, was the fact that the executives at the BMW plant told me that despite not really seeing anybody on the factory floor, more people were employed at BMW after that automation than beforehand. But obviously those are different people with different jobs and different skills. So the challenge of this committee, of course, is to acknowledge that automation and innovation have profound benefits on our society, but they also, of course, generate dislocation. That means people losing their jobs. So the challenge of this committee is to think about those policies, those changes in law that might make it easier for those who are left behind by innovation and technology to continue to participate in the prosperity that is generated by precisely that innovation in that technology. I'm looking forward. This is the first D.C. hearing in which we've had a full complement of Democrats and Republicans. I welcome my Republican colleagues to this and reiterate what I've said since the foundation of this committee, which is that issues of economic disparity are not red or blue issues. There's not a district in the country that doesn't experience the challenges of disparity, and it is high time for this Congress to think about those approaches that might help make sure that every single American household has access to the American dream. The Democrats will have their ideas, the Republicans will have theirs. There won't always be agreement, but I know that the ranking member and I are committed to really highlight those in particular that do have bipartisan support. Before I recognize the ranking member, I would like to recognize that we have with us here today the gentlewoman from Delaware, Lisa Blunt Rochester, and she is here because she is co-chair, along with the ranking member, of the Future of Work Caucus, and we anticipate working very closely with that caucus, again, to identify those policies that will help us make sure that the future of work is a future shared by all Americans. And with that, I will recognize the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Chairman Himes, and welcome, Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. Great to see you here. We're here today to continue our fact-finding mission. We're exploring, we're questioning, we're listening for potential ways to address economic challenges we see across the country. The principles that should guide our work are a belief in equal access to opportunity for all Americans, a belief that American capitalism is the engine to prosperity, a belief that work is more rewarding both emotionally and financially than a government check can ever be, and a belief that strong communities and healthy families are absolutely essential to prosperity because big government does not have the solutions to all of our challenges. This hearing in particular is about the impact of automation and technology on workers. Like anything, it presents both risks and opportunities. And with many things, the media likes to focus in on the risks. Let me give you an example. I have a 1973 New York Times article titled, "Machines, the New Bank Tellers." If you read the article from 1973, it predicts that 75% of all tellers will be replaced by machines, automatic teller machines. Now, today, you can get your money at any time, almost anywhere. And what actually happened? By removing the mundane task of simply counting cash, that piece being automated, tellers were able to gain new skills, which has led to higher pay. What do workers need to do? Increase skills for the jobs of tomorrow, leading to higher wages and better pay. In the early 1970s, I'm sure many people were appropriately concerned that bank tellers would all lose their jobs. And some people likely proposed big government solutions to address these challenges. But thank goodness, socialist policies then failed. Today, you have access to your money almost anywhere, at any time. And instead, starting salaries for bankers has actually increased. I recently spoke to a woman in Racine, Wisconsin, saying an entry-level job in Racine, Wisconsin at a bank is now $19 an hour. American capitalism works. The challenge today still exists and the questions are similar, but we should not put our heads in the sand because of the risks that are being identified. We should embrace opportunity, leverage American capitalism, and help more workers move forward with careers, not just jobs. What are the risks? What are the challenges? Employers in particular right now are being forced to automate because of a worker shortage caused by big government policies. What's causing the worker shortage in particular? Enhanced unemployment benefits, turning the child tax credit into a welfare program instead of a job program, and driving employers' costs up with mandates like Obamacare. Republicans on this committee have solutions to these challenges. And as we'll hear today, the jobs most at risk today, cashiers, salespeople, taxi drivers, amongst others. So the question before us is, how do we prepare workers for the jobs of the future, as we did with bank tellers 50 years ago? Rest assured, there's some politicians who will provide big government, socialist policies, but that won't actually help American workers. We can and should get big government out of the way and instead focus on preparing workers for the jobs of the future. Automation provides challenges and opportunities, like most things in life. Americans have met the challenge in the past by empowering workers. I thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to the discussion and the testimony. I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Before we turn to our witnesses, it has become the custom of this committee to open up a hearing with just a brief couple of minutes in which we hear the stories of a couple of everyday Americans. So I ask for unanimous consent to play that video, and then I will recognize the witnesses. Let's run the video, please.
Technologies Corporation is a Black and woman-owned firm. Vision for the company is to make the electric vehicle charging infrastructure available to underserved markets. We are approaching a point where we might be over-automating to a certain extent. My take on automation is that should be an enabler as opposed to a replacement. One of the things that I really appreciate that was automated is what they call customer relationship management system. What that does is I can keep tabs of my customer. My sales process, it changed. It went from 2 weeks to 48 to 72 hours. And that makes a huge difference in the eyes of the customer because they say, oh, okay. You know, yeah, it's a mom and pop business, but they're really working hard to be professional. And so that just gives me like a point or two. The digital age has made it so that one person can operate very effectively and compete against a lot of large-scale legacy companies.
What excites me the most is what automation is bringing to our country and allowing us to be more competitive with other countries. We are currently in a fight every day with China and other countries that don't play fair. You know, it's a funny thing, you look at the news and I think I read today, there's 140 container ships off the port out in California. When items are made in the United States, you don't need to worry about getting things off of ships into the ports. It allows us to be more competitive of a country. People are realizing what made in America really means and how that is so important to allow people to have skills and to have a good wage, a good living wage. The more we manufacture in the United States, the more we're going to be a country with a higher skill level and higher wages, and everyone has the opportunity in this country to succeed. It'll really, the more we make it, this country will allow us to upskill our team and to raise the standards of living. And that's automation will be able to do that, to help us with that.
It's a good thing because what you can do is you can take jobs that are unsafe. You can take jobs that actually can cause injury to back, to arms, to shoulders, to whatever. And you can actually give those robots that chance to do that. And one of the things that helped us so much is our health and safety department, or with the robotics. They would go in, they would identify jobs that were unsafe, that people were getting hurt on, and those are the jobs that they would work on getting some automation on. But when you over automate, then what you do is you start losing jobs to other countries, or you lose jobs, period, or they start consolidating factories to where robots are doing everything. Robots do not buy cars. People buy cars. I wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps, mainly because of the security at that time of the auto industry and of the ability to be able to join a union. The reason I was able to retire after 35 years at the age of 55 was because of everything that the UAW had provided for me. And that's why when you look at what we have stalled in the Senate right now is the PRO Act. We need to give people a voice.
The influence of automation on our bottom line is obviously that's kept us in business. My father formed the company back in 1963. Our main focus back then was designing. So what we did was we could design anything we really wanted to. We were more into the component end of things as opposed to developing total solutions like we do today. I can tell you that things are drastically different today than they were less than a year ago with regards to automation. We can actually simulate a process before it even happens, before we even drill our first hole. Worker safety is a huge component of our business. It may be sharp, it may be heavy, it may be something somebody has to reach into a machine to get. Anybody that thinks of automation as a job killer is looking at this completely wrong. It's actually an opportunity to collaborate with the automation itself.
I wasn't born here. I was born in Ecuador. I grew up in Puerto Rico. I became a naturalized citizen just in 2014, not all that long ago, and now I'm making direct contributions to the United States space program through NASA. I am the engineering operations mechanisms lead for the Mars 2020 rover. We are currently undergoing all kinds of science investigations, trying to understand whether or not we're alone in the universe. People tend to be afraid by processes that are automated. It's not like we're going to have robot overlord. Instead, we have tools very much controlled by humans. Automation leads to safer work environments. It leads to more creative environments. It's going to require us to be more human. There are jobs on the line, right? Like as we start moving towards automated processes, people are being replaced at the end of the day by machines. But all of that, I think, can be fixed through education. I'm having a great time building and operating spacecraft on other planets. Right? Getting to Mars was no easy thing to accomplish. And the team here at NASA JPL, if you look at us, we're from everywhere. And it's one of the best examples for what we're able to accomplish when we work together and bring all these different people to work on the most difficult problems that could possibly exist.
Thank you again. Now we welcome the testimony of our distinguished witnesses. First, we have Professor Darren Acemoglu, professor at the MIT Department of Economics, who will be followed by Dr. Kristen Brody, fellow at the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Next, we'll have Dr. Sean Dubravik, CEO and president of the Avrio Institute. Next, we'll have Ms. Zoe Baird, CEO and president of the Markle Foundations. And lastly, we have Mr. Brent Orrell, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Welcome to all of you. Witnesses are reminded that their oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. You should be able to see a timer directly in front of you that will indicate how much time you have left. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will appear. I would ask that you be mindful of the timer, and when the red light appears, do quickly wrap up your testimony so that we can be respectful both of other witnesses and the committee members' time. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. Professor Acemoglu, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for an oral presentation of your testimony.
Chairman Himes, Ranking Member Style, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me today to testify on this important topic. U.S. labor market inequality has surged since 1980. Workers with high school degree or less have experienced declines in their real earnings. Even men with a college degree have experienced little gains. In the meantime, racial inequities have widened, regional disparities have multiplied. These sweeping changes have many causes ranging from globalization to the transformation of U.S. labor market institutions. My research indicates that the most important factor has been automation, that is, the substitution of machines and algorithms for tasks previously performed by humans. Automation is not a recent phenomenon. It was rapid during the British Industrial Revolution in 19th century America. Two types of evidence illustrate the inequality implications of today's automation technologies, such as robotics and office software. First, in areas where there has been faster adoption of industrial robots, employment and wages fell and inequality increased. Second, demographic groups specialized in routine tasks in industries undergoing the most rapid automation have uniformly suffered large declines in their real wages. My work finds that automation accounts for more than half, perhaps as much as 3/4 of the surge in US wage inequality. Other trends such as offshoring and competition from cheaper Chinese imports have also played a role, but they have been less important than automation. Automation has contributed to specific dimensions of economic disparities as well. It accounts for 80% of the sizable increase in the college wage premium. It has also widened the gap between black and white Americans. Automation, together with globalization, has been a major driver of regional disparities. But what about the benefits of automation? During the mechanization of agriculture and in the 3 decades following World War II, automation was also rapid, and the US economy created millions of good jobs and achieved broadly shared prosperity. What is different today? Automation in the first half of the 20th century and in the 1950s and 60s went hand in hand with other technological advances that raised worker productivity. Most importantly, businesses introduced new labor-intensive tasks such as technical occupations, clerical tasks, design jobs, precision work in manufacturing. What we have experienced since 1980 is an acceleration in automation and a sharp slowdown in worker-friendly innovations. Put simply, the technological portfolio of the American economy has become much less balanced, and in a way that's highly detrimental to workers and especially to low education workers. Technology is not out of our control. It depends on a society's institutions, including those that govern how the labor market functions and who has social, economic, and political power. Several factors have pushed US businesses towards too much automation. These include competition from Japan and China, which made companies focus on cost cutting, less government leadership in scientific research, and the dominance of the paradigm of big tech targeting the substitution of algorithms for humans. The US tax system has also encouraged excessive automation. We impose an effective tax rate of over 25% on labor, but close to zero taxes on software and equipment used for automation. This generates a powerful motive for excessive automation. Companies can save money when they install machinery to do the same jobs as workers and lay off their employees. It should thus be clear that redirecting our technological energy and ingenuity must play a leading role in redressing these disparities. There are different paths for future technology, and we are not choosing the ones that are best for social good. For example, there are many applications of AI that augment human capabilities and create new tasks in education, healthcare, and even in manufacturing. Some policymakers might be tempted to tackle economic disparities directly, for example, by raising the minimum wage. Minimum wages can help low-pay workers, but they cannot be the main solution to rising inequality when automation is playing such an important role. If the minimum wage is raised significantly, this will be another trigger for companies to automate work. How can we redirect technological change in a more worker-friendly direction? A first step is to correct the asymmetric taxation of capital and labor. That would go a long way, but is not by itself sufficient. A second and more ambitious step is to reevaluate the role of large tech companies. Big tech's preoccupation with algorithmic automation has now affected almost all industries. To change these preoccupations, we need greater social diversity among their executives and researchers and ways of lessening their dominance so that new companies can enter and build technologies that generate opportunities for both low education and high education Americans. These measures can be strengthened with government R&D policies specifically targeting a richer technological portfolio. I would like to end my comments with an example of successful technological redirection. 2 decades ago, renewable energy was prohibitively expensive, and the basic know-how for large-scale clean energy production was lacking. Today, renewables already make up 20% of energy consumption in Europe and 11% in the US, and are cost competitive with fossil fuels. This has been achieved thanks to redirection of technological progress towards renewables. The primary drivers have been government subsidies to green technologies, state-level regulations, and the changing norms of consumers that have pushed many companies to reduce emissions. The same can and should be done for redirecting technological change away from excessive automation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Acemoglu. Dr. Brody, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Himes, Ranking Member Style, and members of the...
I'm sorry, let me ask all the witnesses, make sure the mic is on and that you're actually pretty close to the mic, otherwise we can't hear you up here. Thank you.
Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Himes, Ranking Member Style, and members of the Select Committee. My name is Kristen Brody. I'm a fellow in the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. Thank you for having me this morning. Advances in artificial intelligence and automation have contributed to achievement gaps in the workplace, with employers reporting a deficit of skilled workers to meet their needs. There are labor shortages in specialized sectors, such that many American businesses are currently unable to find qualified workers to fill available jobs. Automation without strategic intervention will increase the skills gap, the wage gap, and the economic inequality in the United States. Black and Latino communities will face unique challenges in labor transitions as a result of automation. Both advances in automation and the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately affected Black and Latino workers. These workers are more likely to be employed in jobs that are at high risk of being automated in the next 2 decades and cannot be done remotely. The 30 jobs with the highest automation risk scores that employ the highest number of U.S. workers, that is, more than 300,000 workers in each occupation, employ 36.3 million American workers and make up 23% of the white employed workforce, 24% of the Black employed workforce, 19% of the Asian employed workforce, and 30% of the Hispanic or Latino employed workforce. Compared to white workers, the data show that Black and Hispanic workers are more likely to be concentrated in occupations at high risk of being automated, whereas Asian American workers are more likely to be employed in occupations at low risk. Black and Latino workers account for 13% and 18% respectively of the U.S. labor force, but are overrepresented in jobs with a high automation risk score. That is, a significant risk of being changed or eliminated as a result of automation. Black workers are overrepresented in 11 of the 30 jobs that employ the most Americans and are at high risk of being automated. These include taxi drivers and chauffeurs, industrial truck and tractor operators, laborers and freight and stock movers, and so on. You can see a full list of these jobs in my report. Latino workers are overrepresented in 13 occupations at high risk of being automated, the same 11 that African Americans are overrepresented in, plus an additional 2 food preparation occupations and dining room and cafeteria attendants and bartenders. These positions overall employed in 2019 6.4 million Black and Hispanic workers. Furthermore, Black workers tend to be employed in jobs at the lower end of the pay scale, with only half of the top 10 jobs that Black workers typically hold paying above the federal poverty guideline for a family of 4, or $25,700 annually. Now I'd like to talk about jobs at low risk of being automated. The 30 jobs that employ the most American workers and have the lowest automation risk scores only employ 22 million American workers, or 14.5% of the white employed workforce, 11.6% of the Black employed workforce, 15% of the Asian employed workforce, and only 7.8% of the Hispanic employed workforce. Black workers are overrepresented in only 5 of the 30 jobs at low risk of being automated. Hispanic workers are not overrepresented in any of these occupations. So what should be done about this? In an industry report titled The Future of Jobs from the World Economic Forum, it's estimated that 75 million jobs will be replaced by a shift in the division of labor between humans and machines, but 133 million new roles may emerge that are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. Thus, Technological innovation will likely result in more job growth, but training and upskilling will be necessary to ensure workers are prepared for these new occupations. So what should be done? Investing in HBCUs is an efficient route to helping Black students and minority-serving institutions for Hispanic and Latino students. According to the United Negro College Fund, HBCUs account for only 3% of the nation's colleges and universities, but enroll 10% of Black students and produce almost 20% of all Black graduates. HBCUs are also more affordable. According to the UNCF, the cost of attendance at an HBCU is 28% less than attending a comparable non-HBCU. HBCUs produce 25% of Black STEM graduates, preparing them for careers and jobs that are less susceptible to automation. In addition to investing in HBCUs and MSIs, the higher education sector should focus on retention, graduation, and placement of Black and Hispanic students. The need to equip these students with functional skills in order for them to be able to use technology will be necessary for these students to succeed in the future of work with automation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brody. Dr. Dubravik, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hines, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my research on the future of work. I will make 4 points. The first is that the future of work is defined by technology, and that means that we will see workers complemented by their work, we'll see workers displaced, and we'll also see new opportunities created. If you go back in time and you look at the 1920 census, we see 221,000 blacksmiths, we see 79,000 shoemakers, we see 19,000 stable hands. All of these jobs have changed and evolved over the last 100 years. If you look at just a sampling of jobs that we see today, these are some that I found on a leading job site just this week: online tutor, telehealth exercise physiologist, digital content specialist, drone operator, mobile video game party coordinator, 3D printing specialist. None of these jobs existed 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So that the nature of work is changing significantly as technology is infused in our daily lives. Point number 2 that I make is that as a result of this change in work, the jobs of the future will be decidedly human. And as we automate some of the routine tasks, as we automate some of the repetitive tasks, we allow workers to focus on much more human-centric work. This work tends to be service-oriented. It tends to require intuition, problem-solving, analytics. It requires communication and empathy. It also is work that is increasingly ambiguous and undefined, so it will require greater flexibility from both employers and employees. Human skills, I think, will be especially paramount in environments that lack data, where we see a dearth of data. These are environments that are ill-prepared for automation and for artificial intelligence. So I think human skill will be especially important in those environments. It'll be important in helping us understand and employ innovation and how to make that transition. I think it's also important to recognize that as we automate certain tasks and as we move to a more undefined and ambiguous work environment, that we might also be producing stress for workers, and the mental challenges of work might become more pronounced as we allow them to focus on more human-centric work. Point number 3 I'll make is that in order to make this transition in work, we will require continuous upskilling and training. It will take an intentional effort to transition workers. We're going to need greater digital skills, we're going to need greater technical skills, and as I already mentioned, we'll need greater human-centric skills. We already see technology playing an important role in developing these skills. Companies like Walmart are using virtual reality to help prepare their employees to have some of those difficult conversations and confrontations that they may have in service-oriented jobs. Bank of America is using virtual reality to help train their employees to handle conversations around sensitive financial information. So we are seeing technology being utilized by companies to help that transition. And my final point is that as the nature of work changes and as mass adoption of advanced technologies increases, it changes the structure of work, and it changes how organizations are structured. Technology bifurcates value chains, so it breaks apart and unbundles traditional value chains. I think what we see happening with work is that as opposed to having a bundled set of tasks and skills that we might do, you see technology start to break that apart. It allows us to specialize, it allows us to focus on discrete tasks. Certainly you see that in the gig economy where workers are focused on a very well-defined task. Digital tools are also disintermediating the traditional relationships between employees and employers. And so I think that's an important dynamic to think about as we move to an environment where you see an increase of self-employed freelancers and gig workers. At the same time, we need to worry about companies that are adopting technology. We also need to be mindful of companies that are not adopting technology and what that means for our future as well as we compete on a global stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dubravik. Ms. Baird, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member and members of the committee. I'm very grateful to be here today and very grateful to you for approaching this enormously important issue of helping the country transition to a digital economy with much greater growth and equity. My priority at Markle is to advance solutions toward a labor market that will enable workers excuse me, to move into good jobs in the digital economy. We're particularly focused, and I hope you will be too, on the 100 million Americans, almost 70% of Americans who do not have a four-year college degree. 100 million Americans, almost 70% of Americans. Markle has formed the Rework America Alliance, which is a broad collaboration of unions, civil rights organizations, businesses, technology companies. We have a Rework America state network of 30 bipartisan governors, and we are working to try to drive a labor market that will include all Americans in prosperity and self-respect. Through the Alliance, Markle has identified 77 occupations as gateway occupations that will enable people without a four-year college degree to succeed in the economy going forward. And our research shows that despite conventional assumptions, workers have the experience and the capabilities of learning what they need to learn to do these jobs, and often can do these jobs across sectors even without additional training. At the same time, our research has shown that without targeted interventions that spur the growth of good jobs, there simply are not enough good jobs that draw on the potential of these workers. So today I want to talk about both how you might inspire and catalyze the creation of more good jobs for the 100 million plus Americans I just focused on, and how we might prepare people for those jobs. Federal investments in infrastructure and green technology can have a dramatic effect on the creation and acceleration of gateway jobs and other good jobs for low and middle wage workers, and support workers to build skills as necessary. So as those investments are made over time, they will create good jobs in and of themselves, but can help transition workers to the economy of the future. It's important to focus in making those investments, though, on how those investments can drive job creation. So in addition to achieving building roads and eliminating lead pipe, we need to be very intentional about how to drive the creation of good jobs as we make those investments. Many of these jobs will require more specialized training, and it used to be that to knock down a brick wall, you needed to be big and burly and swing a sledgehammer, and today you can operate a robot. And so we need to figure out how to include women and people who have been excluded, people of color in these jobs, and in the apprenticeships, the registered apprenticeships that can lead to these jobs. In addition, we need to focus on training. And how do we rebuild an adult learning system for the digital economy. When we moved from the agricultural economy to the industrial age, we invented the high school so that there was common learning across the country. And now we need to develop the adult learning system that's rapid and affordable and connected to jobs so that we can see the outcomes of the training system. And that includes deploying our existing training infrastructure for adults, but moving well beyond that, because people will need to be able to learn throughout their lifetime. To my mind, employer training is an enormously important part of this, and I'm happy to discuss with you things like the tax questions. I also think we should be looking at SEC disclosure of investments by employers in training so that we have transparency and employers are able to pull together effectively the training that they do, both for new workers and incumbent workers. And through all of that, I think we have the opportunity, through both a focus on how we create more jobs through our investments and on our new training system, we have an enormous opportunity to do better than we did in 2009 when we came back from the Great Recession, where we made a lot of investments that did not result for workers in better jobs and better equity. And we have the opportunity coming out of the COVID economy to create a much more equitable economic environment for all Americans. So I thank you very much for having me here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Baird. Lastly, Mr. Orell, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm pleased to be with you and to have this opportunity to address the rapidly changing landscape of technological innovation, automation, and the future of human work in the context of ongoing technological transformation of the economy. There's an important and I believe somewhat neglected contextual framework to these issues. What can we say with relative certainty about the changing skill demands in an economy that's undergoing such rapid transformation? What are the annuals, the passing changes, and what are the perennials, the recurring changes? For decades, dating back to the Eisenhower administration, the focus of government, business, education, and learners has been on increasing the supply of so-called STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and math. There's no question that technical skills are vital in a high-technology economy, and that despite all our effort, there's still substantial unmet demand for individuals with these skills. However, there's another parallel story that has to be considered in shaping workforce development policy. David Deming at Harvard has looked at the effect of automation and technology on the increase in demand for workers that have both high-level technical skills and counterintuitively high levels of social skills, the so-called non-cognitive or soft skills. Wages follow a similar pattern, with the most robust wage growth going toward those who combine high-level technical skills and high levels of social skills. These findings, I would add, are echoed when employers are asked what's missing in the workforce. Foundational skills such as communication, teamwork, critical thinking, collaboration, grit, and perseverance, among others. Most employers will say they can train for technical skills, but they have far more difficulty training for non-cognitive skills. Aside from their immediate utility, non-cognitive skills are important for another key reason. Taken as a whole, they are a matrix of skills that support the acquisition of all other skills. In a world where employer skill demands can be transformed seemingly overnight, this kind of flexibility and adaptability represents the master skills of the 21st century. These non-cognitive skills allow workers to pivot more easily into new jobs as automation increasingly takes over routine, task-based skill sets. The labor shortage associated with the recovery from the COVID-19 recession will be likely accelerate demand for high-tech and master skills going forward. Labor shortages and rising wages increase incentives for automation and as firms seek to reduce costs and position themselves competitively, both locally and globally. More automation of routine tasks means required skills will likely tilt even further towards skills that are more difficult to automate, those made up of non-routine tasks, and which tend to incorporate greater social and interpersonal agility. Those who have workers who have those types of skills, as I noted earlier, will be likely best prepared to adapt to these changes in skill demands. Conversely, those who struggle with non-cognitive skills will be at a disadvantage in finding work and keeping up with the pace of change. The high-tech future is, ironically, a non-cognitive future as well. The solution to our rapidly evolving economy is not to attempt to constrain technological change or alter its course, but rather to build up the capacities of our workforce in both technical and non-cognitive domains while technological change continues to run its course. Policymakers at all levels should emphasize non-cognitive development through a variety of approaches to help increase the supply of these skills and help equip workers with a full portfolio of capacities that they will need to survive.
Thank you, Mr. Orell. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Thank you for your testimonies, by the way, very, very interesting. And if I have one complaint, it's that we didn't spend enough time on possible solutions. So I'm going to use my time to see if I can elicit some of those solutions to the challenges posed by automation. I made reference earlier to the fact that we have silly arguments in this institution. One of those silly arguments, which I'm sure we will continue to hear today, is that the Democrats are interested only in government solutions. The Republicans are obsessed with the power of the free markets and resist all government policy. As evidenced by the use of the word socialism when talking about anything that the Democrats think of. The reality, of course, the irrefutable historical reality for 240 years in this country has been that American prosperity has always been some kind of joint venture, some kind of partnership between the public sector and the private sector. I often will wave this personal digital assistant, this phone around as evidence of the fact that prosperity comes from, yes, the remarkable innovations and commercialization of the private sector, but as I say to school children, everything that is cool about this device came out of government R&D. The semiconductors that drive it, the GPS satellites, which the government put into the air, the voice recognition system, and this, of course, extends well beyond consumer products, the federal highway system, infrastructure. I could go on and on. It is also true with respect to human infrastructure. Over a century ago, this country decided that as a public good, we would provide primary education, public schools to every single American, Pell Grants, state colleges, state universities. It's ridiculous to argue anything but that American prosperity is a joint venture between government establishing the sort of framework, the R&D and the infrastructure, and the private sector doing its thing with respect to innovation and wealth creation. So what I'd like to do with the remainder of my time is just ask each of our witnesses to highlight the single best policy. And I know that's a challenge, but I've got limited time. The single best policy that this institution could either emphasize, augment, or create that would help those workers. And I sense that it's probably in the area of education and training, because what we're talking about here is creating the workforce for the 21st century. The single best, most important policy that this institution could augment or create to address the challenges that come out of automation. I'm going to ask you to keep it to about 30 seconds each, starting with you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Chairman Himes. Actually, I want to take a slight exception to that, because I think a lot of the discussions on technology have the presumption that technology has a definite preordained path, and then all we can do is make sure that workers adapt to it. I think it's a two-way street. Technology is shaped by human decisions, company priorities, government policy. And there is no guarantee that the current path that we are on is the right one, so that all we have to do is make sure that workers adapt to it. I completely agree with my colleagues here and with you that we have to invest in education and training, especially workplace training is very inadequate in this country compared to many of our competitors. And there are many communities that are disadvantaged where increases in education spending and increases in education quality would be very important. However, I think we also have to investigate whether the direction of technology is the right one. And my belief is that right now, US is going in the direction of excessive automation, and with the advent of AI, there is a danger that this is going to be amplified, and there is no need for this type of excessive automation. AI, for example, as conceived by the early founders of machine intelligence, was not supposed to be just a system for replacing humans. It has the capability to augment humans, to become a tool in the hands of humans of all different levels of skills, and that's why my testimony emphasized not education, which is very important, I believe in it, but various different ways of changing the direction of technological change. In particular, I think tax policy, and as you have rightly emphasized, government leadership. It's absolutely correct, as you put your emphasis on that. The biggest breakthroughs in innovation in this country have been have come out of a joint endeavor from government and the private sector. Just government wouldn't work, because I think a lot of the creativity, experimentation, diversity is.
I'm sorry. Let me cut you off, because I do want to be mindful of the time, and I do want to give the other witnesses. But we are going to want to follow up on something very intriguing you said, which is that the technological path in this country may be the wrong one. That, of course, is not necessarily in our purview to deal with, but that's an intriguing statement. But I need to cut you off because I need to hear from the other witnesses. Dr. Brody.
Invest in HBCUs and MSIs to encourage pipelines between them and corporations so that Black and Hispanic students can be better prepared for the jobs that we know are coming, because automation is continuing to advance. So it's not just government investment, it's encouraging corporations to provide information to these schools so that students can be prepared for jobs that will exist, and so that they can know what they need to know and be able to do in order to get internships and jobs in these particular industries. Professors don't necessarily know, schools don't necessarily know, administrators don't necessarily know. They need to be partnered with the corporations that are going to be doing the hiring, and the government can fund those pipelines.
Thank you, Dr. Brody. Dr. Dubrovik.
I think that partnership is important, and I think you see a lot of industries starting to do that, where they are partnering with community colleges and others to build the curriculum that will enable those students to immediately be hired by those organizations in the industry. I also think another inhibitor is what stands between the individual and the training. So we see companies like Walmart and Amazon both offering to pay higher education costs for some of their employees. What employees won't take advantage of that, and what are the inhibitors that are keeping them from doing that? Is it childcare? Is it time? What are the inhibitors? I think that's where we also need to look.
Thank you. Ms. Baird?
Excuse me, I'll focus on training also. I'd love to come back and talk more about how to create more good jobs too. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that just looking to community college and the college system, as important as they are not going to serve the over 100 million Americans who are almost 70% of the workforce who do not have a four-year degree. Even our community college system in its current form, with persistence to a degree, hasn't been serving these workers. And we want, and those systems want to serve people more effectively. So I would encourage you to look at federal investment in education differently, and to think about it as a lifelong enterprise, and how we can generate what Congress calls for rightly, which is we need to know that these programs lead to better wage jobs. So how do we generate the data out of a whole panoply of programs so that Congress will feel confident in investing? I know that's been a great inhibitor to date in getting both sides of the aisle to feel confident in investing in training. The other thing I think needs to be on your agenda is employer training. And this may mean that you need to look at the tax code or incentives for small and medium-sized businesses to train incumbent workers as well as new workers. But we used to have a phenomenal system of employer training. And a lot of the companies in your own districts have a history of fabulous employer training. And that has gone away for lots of reasons, some of which very significantly have to do with policy decisions. And labor management training is some of the best training we have. That can be scaled up, and it can also be deployed even for people who aren't members of unions through sectoral work. So I would encourage you to do something which would really be quite new for Congress, but really important in the digital economy, and look at how you can generate and invest in employer-based training or the kinds of employer partnerships that were mentioned before.
Thank you. Ms. Baird, and finally, Mr. Orrell.
I'll just echo what Ms. Baird just said, which is that we do need a life cycle approach to human capital development. It's not enough to think about this strictly in terms of training for adults or retraining for adults. We need to be thinking about the formation of human capital from the beginning of life, including among young children. I think that's where human capital, the foundations for human capital are set. I think that if we do that, if we think about this as a life cycle approach to human capital development, many of the other problems are going to take care of themselves. People will be better able to take advantage of both education, training, and job opportunities if they have the matrix of learning skills that they need in order to keep pace with change. That was the whole point of the universal high school movement in a century ago, was that there was this synchronization between our educational institutions with this rapidly and dynamically this economy that was being rapidly and dynamically reshaped. It's really impossible to tell, in my view, what the future demands of skills are going to be. So what we need to do is invest in people who are able to learn and adapt.
Thank you, Mr. Orwell. Before I recognize the ranking member, it's my intention to make sure the committee stays rooted in fact and analysis, so I seek unanimous consent to submit for the record a Wall Street Journal article dated September 1st, which points out that states that ended enhanced federal unemployment benefits early have so far seen the same job growth as those states which continued offering the pandemic-related extra aid. Without objection, so ordered. With that, I recognize my friend, the ranking member, for his questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I drive across southeast Wisconsin, Janesville, Racine, Kenosha, and you see the same stories across the country, I'm seeing how the worker shortage is a significant factor, and in particular, in the expansion of automation. We heard one of our witnesses say excessive automation. And you see this from restaurant workers to warehouses going across. And the worker shortage is being driven by federal government incentives to workers not to work. Biden's policies are pushing automation. And this is because the policies are preventing people from getting back to work. Here's the risk, as I see it. Once those jobs are automated, some workers are going to find it harder to re-enter the workforce. And so big government intervention in the economy is hurting workers in the long run. Instead, it's leading more Americans out of work and onto government dependencies. So, Mr. Orwell, how is the worker shortage caused by federal government impacting employers' decisions to automate?
I don't think there's any doubt, as Dr. Acemoglu indicated, that government is deeply involved and deeply implicated in variety of ways that are shaping our labor market. Some of those are subtle through the tax code. Some of those are overt. We've seen, I think it's an open question right now. It's the degree to which the enhanced unemployment benefits and the stimulus payments to families have impacted work. We did a survey of unemployed workers just a couple months ago. The biggest concern they cited was what to do with their children, and then fears of actually contracting COVID came in second. So I think it's a complex picture. Certainly, any policy that we impose that increases the cost of labor immediately incentivizes automation. You can't get away from it.
We heard that from an earlier witness as it relates to the minimum wage.
Yeah. So when we impose policies on business that raise labor costs, it increases the incentive for automation. I think that businesses right now, from observing what they're doing with wages, as you pointed out, $19 an hour, the $15 an hour minimum wage has almost been left behind as an idea because businesses have responded to this worker shortage with these higher wages. That is, at some point, businesses will start to say, I can't chase this anymore. I can't chase workers with these wages. I'm going to have to think about automation because it makes there's a good business case for them to do that.
That's the risk that I'm concerned with, is the excessive automation caused not by any one particular government policy, but it's the amalgamation of a series of government policies that we've seen be implemented over the previous 9 months. Let me shift gears, if I can, briefly, Ms. Baird. You referenced the 70% of our workforce that does not have a four-year college degree. Do you need a college degree to be successful?
No.
I agree with you. I think that's an important point, that there's a lot of ways that we can prepare workers for the jobs of the future outside of just a four-year college degree. The chairman, I think, was correct. We don't talk enough about solutions, and so let me use the remaining time that I have to go back to you, Mr. Orell. I hear time and again about not only the risk, but I think we should also just touch here on the opportunities. You've done a lot of work in this space about helping workers make sure that they have the skills for the jobs of the future. What workforce development programs in particular do you see that have helped prepare workers for the jobs of the future?
We have what Harry Holzer and others have described as these little gems of programs that are kind of scattered around the country. So if you look at a program like Perscolis up in New York, and they've got, that's where they started, they've got affiliates around the country in a number of cities now. But what they do is that they take workers who are in the $20,000, $25,000 a year strata in terms of their employment, and they move them up into much higher paying, sometimes 3 times as much, into IT careers. How do they do that? Well, they focus not just on the development of IT skills, but really on that, what I talked about earlier in terms of the non-cognitive skills. They create an immersive experience of what it means to be in a professional setting in the workforce. And they work very hard, and this is at doing this, and it has paid off. The challenge that we face in this domain is that we have little gems, and what we need are scalable strategies. And that is much more difficult to do. I don't think I've seen anybody come forward with, I know how to create that kind of opportunity for Americans broadly. Another program I would point to is the FAME project that started in Louisville, Kentucky, in the advanced auto manufacturing world. Again, they spend about, these are late high school students mostly transitioning into these jobs, but they spend about 25% of all the time that they have with the participants on developing non-cognitive skills, workplace skills. So this is what I think we've missed in the last number of decades, is that we've thought that these non-cognitive skills would take care of themselves, and they haven't. And so we need to pay more attention to that while we continue to build up the technical skills of our workforce.
Thank you very much. I think that's good feedback and something for us to be able to take away. I know automation conjures up a lot of fear as people look, but I think finding those opportunities for us to move forward are important. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Recognize Ms. Kaptur for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the scholarship of all of our witnesses. I do note, however, that there's almost no experience working for a long time in the industrial heartland. I come from the Great Lakes industrial heartland. I just want to put that on the record. And I have 2 questions, but I'm going to make a statement before I ask for any replies. My questions are, which financial firms, we've come through an era of almost half a century of financialization of our economy, and the financing of production and investment has largely moved to the coasts. All right, my part of the country doesn't participate in that. So my questions are, which financial firms finance outsourcing of U.S. production? For example, when we saw a mainline American company like Maytag from Newton, Iowa, be outsourced to Monterrey, Mexico, who financed that? And or Parker Seal from Ohio, moving from Ohio to Matamoros, Mexico, who financed that? That's one question. Second question, which financial firms seek to invest in patented inventions by inventors who live in the part of the country that I come from? I'd like your advice on that because I'd like to call them up. Our part of the country is very, we've provided some charts to you that show how few patents are now being approved from that part of the country compared to the coasts. And again, we have this donut hole in the middle. So those are my two questions. But I did want to say that I am someone who, when the pandemic started, and I listened to President Trump say that the answer to no ventilators was to create an air bridge to bring them in from another country. I thought, that's the wrong answer for me. Let's put them in Indiana, or let's put them in Ohio. Let's create them here. What's wrong with us? Now, under President Biden, we have automobiles unable to be brought to dealerships because we don't have silicon chips. And so the answer is, well, let Taiwan produce more, or Malaysia. I haven't heard anybody say, why don't we do it here? So I wanted to express my point of view at this particular hearing, but I'm interested in your answers to the questions, if anybody can, which financial firms predominantly move production away from our nation, and which firms are out there who seek to help patent holders in our part of the country move investment up the chain. And I want to compliment President Baird. You've actually used two words no one has used in the last couple years, auto mechanic, in your testimony. Thank you so much for doing that, because we are now 750,000 mechanics short across the country with current technology, and as we move into the new automotive age with electric cars and hydrogen-propelled vehicles and so forth, we are going to need many more. Look at the infrastructure bill. See if you can find the word auto mechanic. You won't find it. And so I just want to thank you, because we need to provide practical skills training. I'm very interested in your ideas about how to help to educate our workforce to meet the market of today and tomorrow. So thank you for doing that. But I'm interested in an answer. Who's paying for the outsourcing of U.S. jobs and the lack of investment in parts of the country where we don't have angel investors?
Well, if I may, I can't answer the question, excuse me, of who's paying for it, but I'd love to tackle the question of how to create more jobs in your district. We have a whole range of new technologies coming in. We're talking about automation, but we really should be looking at the whole range of technological change that's going to affect all the jobs in this country and around the world over time. And that's AI, and it's quantum computing, and it's robotics, and it's biotech. These things are not just automation. And we have the potential, if we think intentionally up front about the policies that we need as these technologies commercialize, we have the possibility of driving the creation of more good jobs and more distributed, equitable jobs. It is not inevitable that the internet had to develop the way it did. In fact, someone recently, Foreign Affairs recently cited an article I wrote in 2002 in Foreign Affairs as the internet was just commercializing in the US and the developing world, that we needed policy up front for the internet so that we had privacy and security and distributed economic benefit. And we didn't do it then with our enthusiasm for the growth of internet businesses, but we now should have learned, and we have the potential now to develop very good policy which both drives sustainable economic growth so that businesses, I mean, I used to be a lawyer, and businesses want predictability. And what's happening now with tech companies is not built into a predictable model. And so companies will cooperate, I believe, in developing sustainable commercialization so that we don't have to apply only retrospective policy remedies to things that have gone wrong in marketplaces, and we can—
The gentlewoman's time has expired. Ms. Baird, if I
You can call me whatever you like, but
any further thoughts you can submit.
I apologize for
Thank you.
going
I need
over
to be a little
time.
disciplined on time here. Mr. Davidson, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the ranking member, Stile, and I thank our witnesses. I appreciate the discussion. We're really here dealing with the fact that change is hard. It's not something that we can stop, though. Change is inevitable. It will really only be constrained by force. It might move somewhere else based on incentives, But I get concerned when I say we can somehow know the right amount of change to allow or permit. Frankly, America has been dynamic since its founding. Innovation has happened here from agriculture, the Industrial Revolution, automobiles, aviation, aerospace, computing, the internet, and now in the fintech era. Anyone that learned to type on a typewriter knows that innovation is changing our lives today. I mean, I'm literally looking at something that I can do here in real time on an electronic device that I can communicate with other people back and forth here. That's a massive productivity enhancer. I don't need to buy as much whiteout. Somebody's affected by that. The typewriter alone eliminated gazillion clerk jobs. We saw in the video that folks prepared, engineers who were using advanced CAD models. I think of the engineering floors that had drafting tables and the math folks that were sitting there doing trigonometry by hand, longhand trigonometry, and showing proof of work so somebody could check the math that we've all done with software. Or the accounting floors that had books and books and books that did cost accounting. All this automation has changed lives. It's not just low-wage, low-skill jobs in the ag sector. The knowledge economy really has changed the planet. And frankly, if you go to Ohio, over in eastern Ohio, the Amish folks have dealt with that in their own way. They've said, we're going to keep that out. And, you know, some people would say that's a great thing. It may be, you know, highly compatible with environmental impact statements, for example. I don't see a lot of people advocating for that level of it, so it's something in between. But I think the concern I've got is dealing with change. And, you know, like Chairman mentioned that we actually have to get to a solution. What are we going to do about it? And the people that are providing the solutions are, frankly, the people that have to get the work done. And the people that have an idea. Our intellectual property platforms, frankly, have been diminished in a lot of ways that have advantaged the biggest companies, and they've hurt the people that actually have the innovation and the patents. So I think we should focus certainly some on trade. Prior to coming to Congress, I was in manufacturing sector, and we dealt with trade heavily. Frankly, policy decision on trade, heavily consensus between big government and big business, where it helped allies and, frankly, abandoned principles like freedom and free markets and shifted the role of government to pick winners and losers versus set a free and fair marketplace. And so America's companies and innovators have flourished when they compete with other companies and innovators, but we've left them disadvantaged competing with other countries, particularly with respect to China. So I want to share a story and focus with you, Ms. Baird. So when I first was in manufacturing, I had a woman who had worked at the same press, metal stamping press, making parts the same way for an extended period of time. Obviously, she didn't deal well with change. That's the nature of her job. Change was hard. So we had to confront, well, what do we do with this job? We created a system that by the time I left that business and ran for Congress, the same person was able to make far more money, have a lot of pride in the job, run 5 presses, and really spend time caring for the movement of the parts and the quality control metrics because it was heavily automated. She was able to adapt to the change, and I hope that our company created a culture that helped her do that. We created a lot of jobs over the years, but people had to change to do them. And one of the areas that we dealt with was engineers. So after the 08-09 financial crisis, we had a situation where someone called me and said, I've worked for this company for 10 to 15 years, and they don't want to hire me back. I'm like, really? Yeah, they will only hire back people who have a bachelor's degree or higher for the same engineering department that I was just working in. I was like, well, I'll hire you. And then lo and behold, not long, the company was outsourcing work to us using the engineer while their degreed engineer with no experience worked there. Have you seen that have a big impact on our economy versus just focusing on skills?
Well, first of all, I compliment you on recognizing the talent of a worker who you felt could be trained up into a better and more fulfilling job. That's such an important part of what needs to happen today. Businesses need to be, and it will take some incentives because people have kind of lost sight of it, but will need to be incented to train and retrain their workers. I also think that, as you point out, it's enormously important that we value the workers without a bachelor's degree, and the bachelor's degree has come to be a surrogate for things where we can find all kinds of other surrogates. In other words, experience. Someone's done a job in a different sector, so that auto mechanic, or someone who learned to take apart a car.
All good points, and I wish we had more time, but I appreciate the chairman's indulgence, and I yield.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Moore is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chair, for yielding, and thank all of the witnesses for sharing this very compelling testimony that we've been given here. My time is short, so just let me tie all of your testimonies together as I've come to understand it. There seems to be some similarity in the views that you all have regarding technology that I find very intriguing, and that is one thing that you think that there ought to be some strategic intentionality about how to use technology. Soon as I get my magnifying glass, Dr. Brody, I'm going to look at all these jobs that you've categorized as disappearing, I swear. And the displacement that they cause. And all of you have said that either we need some customized labor training, we need soft skills, we need to focus on jobs that will become more human, we need to adapt, and so on. And I know it is very, very risky. I know that economies that are successful are economies that do this kind of planning. I'm thinking of China, one of our great adversaries in the marketplace. Are we really advocating at this point that governments, corporations, educational institutions, we do it informally through grants programs, but that we ought to be more intentional about these collaborations, particularly in a situation? I'll give you an example. I remember years ago, there was a real effort in my community to get create some BMWs, black men working. And so they put a program together where these guys worked on a project and they welded stuff together. They were making about $20 an hour, which was a lot of money then. They felt like Mitch. But they couldn't get a job after that because they couldn't read a welding blueprint. I mean, I can't read it either, but there are 6 parts to a welding blueprint: the revision blocks, the drawing numbers, I don't know whether this is something that can be automated at some point, but these people were displaced like immediately after having finished some customized labor training. So I'm going to yield to the panel. And then my follow-up question is sort of like what Mr. Davidson maybe alluded to. There are people who just will not be able to adapt. I mean, they can't, for whatever reason, they can't pull up their whole family and move to another community where they can go learn how to build solar panels, or they can't adapt. And so I would love the panel just quickly take a few seconds, starting maybe with Dr. Brody.
So I think there are 2 groups, and thank you, Congresswoman. I want to give one example. Toyota Motor Manufacturing in Kentucky, in Georgetown, they have a relationship with Kentucky State University where they're preparing students for jobs that are going to exist with Toyota. These are not just blue-collar jobs, they're engineering jobs. So the students go to Kentucky State, they do an internship at Toyota, they go on to get a degree in engineering from the University of Kentucky. So relationships like that, like Atlanta Metropolitan State College and their partnership with Europe and corporations that hire Europe grads. But that's just students, right? So what about people who are already employed and, as you said, don't have time to do that, can't move? So Richard Aram and Mitchell Stevens wrote a paper for the Brookings Institution about learning opportunity credits. They propose that the government give learning opportunity credits so that workers can get the training that they need from colleges or universities in their area and not have to move and not have to relocate their families.
Thank
and
you, Ms.
continue
Baird.
their industry.
You know, there's so many programs that are just disoriented, disconnected. You know, you've got people who got stacks and stacks of these certificates for customized labor training programs. Back to my question about, are we at risk of doing something that could almost be called socialistic to do a closer coordination to keep people employed?
I don't think so. And let me point you to what governors are doing. With CARES Act funds, for example, Governor Raimondo, now Secretary Raimondo, created 5,000 new jobs in Rhode Island, where she put together the training, the coaching, we did the coaching there for them, and the employers to get people moved into these jobs. Governor Holcomb in Indiana created 50,000 jobs through his workforce efforts using CARES Act money. I happened to connect the two of them, and they collaborated. So this is a bipartisan challenge, but it's the component parts of what it takes for someone to succeed and get into a better job and enable an employer to grow as well are there.
My time, unfortunately, has ended.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Arrington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you, and it's an honor to serve on this committee with my colleagues, and I'm trying to get my voice here. My hot tea didn't help. Ranking Member Stiles, thank you. And for the witnesses, thank you for your insights. You know, this is my first hearing, and I think sort of philosophically on the title of this select committee, Economic Disparity and Fairness. To me, economic disparity is a reality. We all have different socioeconomic stations in life that we occupy. I think the question or the subject would be better targeted if we talked about economic opportunity. Fairness is subjective. Ask the 20% of Americans who are the highest income earners who pay 80% of the freight in terms of the cost of our government, if that's fair. After the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you had the bottom 1% having a higher wage increase by 2 times than the top 1%. Is that fair? The bottom 50% had 3 times the wage increase percentage as the top 10% of income earners. So fairness is too subjective for me, Mr. Chairman. I know that's the title, and I doubt I can convince you to change it, but I would like to focus on economic opportunity and economic mobility and prosperity for all Americans. All Americans. To me, that's a laudable goal, and that's one I can agree with no matter what your political persuasion is, what part of the country you come from. So now, with respect to the topic at hand, I like the story about Milton Friedman, who was in China and came upon some workers doing manual labor with shovels instead of heavy construction equipment. And when he was asked, or when he asked them why this was the case, he was told it was to maintain high employment. To which he responded, then instead of shovels, why don't you give them spoons and create even more jobs? Now, I haven't heard anybody suggest that we not transition and that there's not a natural sort of evolution, if you will, with innovation. The question is, and this is my sort of framework, how do we anticipate best these trends and changes that will disrupt industries in our economy? Number one. Number two, how do we best adapt? How do we offer that opportunity for skills training and education in a way that prepares the future workforce based on the needs. And then lastly, accommodation. So how do we accommodate this shift? I would suggest to you that freer markets and fairer trade is the most effective and powerful force for creating those opportunities to accommodate in these in the trials and tribulations for those who are having the most difficult job making that transition. We want more jobs. We want higher wages. And when you reduce, and I heard the chairman's comments, I appreciate what he's saying. I agree, government provides civil order, public safety, rule of law. We don't have that. You can't create jobs and make a living and have any quality of life in this country. It'd be chaos. By the way, there is chaos in parts of our country, especially in my state of Texas along the border. But nevertheless, government has a role. But too much government, as Reagan said, we can't be for big government, big taxes, big bureaucracy, and still be for the little guy. Because even in the tax proposals that are being hashed out by my Democrat colleagues, even the most progressive tax policy experts say that the majority of that will be borne by working families. Higher cost of goods, lower wages. It'll be less innovation, less productivity, less competitiveness for our country. So more jobs go back overseas. So, you know, this is a diatribe from my first hearing, but I would just suggest that we need to, the best thing we can do in these transitions is to offer more opportunity, mobility, and a chance for a better quality of life for all Americans, which I think is freer markets and fairer trade. Mr. Chairman, thanks for that indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jayapal, coming to us remotely, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a really important hearing, and it's been really interesting to listen to our witnesses. Thank you all so much for being here. I come from a very tech-heavy district. We are proud to be a center of tech innovation. I also come from a state that is one of the most union-dense states in the country, with extremely strong worker protections, which I think are absolutely critical. And I was struck, Mr. Acemoglu, by your statements about tech being shaped by human decisions, government policy, and the question we have to ask ourselves is whether the direction we're going in, and particularly around excessive automation, is the right one. And so I think that this is really important because what I hear is workers that feel the rate of technological advancement in the 21st century as simply overwhelming. They feel it touching their lives every day, whether it's new equipment on the factory floor or online payroll systems or faster computing power or the increasing use of remote surveillance by their employers. And so this question about technological advancement and automation not being inherently good or bad is absolutely right. But I think we have to pay attention to who does it benefit and why. So Dr. Acemoglu, as your testimony and publications argue, the current pace of automation and its distributional effects are not natural occurrences. They are the result of policy choices. And you note that not only is capital, such as machinery, taxed at a lower rate than labor, but that capital taxes have actually decreased since the 1980s when you observe a surge in inequality. So I want to ask you about the tax code. Which changes to the United States tax code since 1980 do you think have had the largest impact on the incentive to automate?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, and thanks for emphasizing that technology is neither good nor bad. It's exactly what we make of it, and one of the factors is exactly tax policy. And You know, if you go back to the 1980s, capital was more lightly taxed than labor at the time as well, but the gap was about 10 percentage points, and since then it has increased to over 20 percentage points. There are many factors that have contributed to this. I think the most important one has been the very generous depreciation allowances that enable companies to write off a lot of taxes because of their investments. The effective tax implications of that when they invest in equipment or automation have been very important. But as critical are changes in the corporate tax rate and the marginal tax rates faced by investors. And another factor that I think is very important and actually distinguishes us from many of our competitors is that in the United States, many companies are tax exempt when it comes to capital tax, for example, S corporations or private partnerships and other capital holding companies essentially avoid capital income taxes. And what that implies is that there's an unfairness or a lack of opportunity for some companies to make exactly the same type of benefits from their investments because other companies, depending on their tax status, are avoiding some of those taxes. So there are ways of actually creating a more level playing field between capital and labor that would improve economic efficiency as well, for example, by broadening the tax base for capital. And we can also think of ways of either cutting some of the payroll taxes on labor, especially workers that are at the greatest risk of automation. I think those are all ideas that need to be investigated, but some of the policy proposals or policy reality, for example, the global minimum corporate tax rate, will make some of these easier, because one of the factors that has made capital harder to tax is exactly the fact that some of the profits can be realized in other jurisdictions and makes it much harder to tax and gives a greater bargaining power to capital. So I think those are really important ideas to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at, I can't see the timer, Mr. Chairman, but I think I have a little bit more time. But let me just say, I'm also interested in this question of workers with low skills that are displaced by automation, who are forced to take lower quality jobs. I want to ask in what way those jobs are inferior to those vulnerable to automation. And that's still to you, Dr. Acemoglu.
Well, thank you very much for asking that.
Answer it short because I can't see my timer. So
yeah,
I don't know.
It's been a very common pattern, both in the U.S. and across different countries, and many blue-collar jobs or office jobs that are higher wage and enable career building have been replaced by lower quality jobs, much lower pay, less security. It's exactly part of where the problem of good jobs, as Ms. Baird put it, and inequality that we have emphasized comes from. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time is the gentlewoman's time is expired. Ms. Bice is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the witnesses for being with us this morning. I want to echo what my colleague from Ohio, Representative Davidson, mentioned, that change is inevitable. While automation will certainly make changes to our economy in the coming years, there are also millions of jobs that will never be fully automated. I look around the room, and I don't know about the rest of you. Certainly, Representative Donald's here may be willing to have a machine or robot cut his hair, but Representative Jacobs and I likely would not want that to happen. Jobs like plumbing, welding, cosmetology, and many more require a human workforce and have significant limitations that preclude them from being fully automated. I am reminded, for those of you that are homeowners, that I had an issue with a dishwasher. I called a plumber. Young man showed up at the door, and I said, tell me your story. He said, I went to the State University, got a 4-year degree, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. My father owned a plumbing company. He said, you can come work for me and make a living until you figure out what you want to do. And he realized that he really enjoyed working with his hands, meeting new people. And so he plans on taking over the plumbing company in a few years. And I said, so your father didn't need to pay for 4 years of college? And he said, no. And to make matters worse, my sister went to college as well and is now a realtor. I think we have put so much emphasis on college, we have forgotten that there are so many jobs in this country that are high-paying jobs or can create, you being a small business owner, that we discount that. And to the point that was made earlier by Ms. Baird, we need to be focusing on not just the 30% that are attending college, but the 70% that are not. Professor, you mentioned in your opening testimony that raising the minimum wage increases automation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Worrell, thank you for being here today. There are proposals on Capitol Hill to increase the minimum wage. Can you describe what the impact of that increase would have on the rate of automation?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned before, two things. The increase in the minimum wage has largely, in the post-COVID environment, become kind of a moot question. Wages have gone above what the advocates of a $15 an hour minimum wage ever dreamed. So I think that question has largely become moot in the economy with the kind of labor shortage that we've been experiencing. So on the broader question of how much can you impose on firms without accelerating automation, I think it's a delicate question. I mean, and we need to be very cognizant of the fact that every time we raise labor costs, we are incentivizing automation. Now, frankly, I'm in favor of automation. I think it's a good thing. Historically, we can look over the history of not just this country, but all developed countries, and automation has been integral to raising living standards over time. So having said that, I do think we've made mistakes in not adequately preparing for the impact of automation. How do we prepare workers and communities for what's coming to them? Because this is not slowing down. This is the pace is picking up.
So great segue into my next question, which is the needs of the future workforce are changing so quickly, but our education and workforce training programs don't necessarily keep up. What actions can we take to make sure the nation's workforce training programs and universities and colleges are more agile to meet the ever-changing workforce needs?
It's a great question, and my preference on this is that we look really hard at decentralizing our workforce development systems, not as a matter of fiat for the entire country all at once, but I do think we need some innovation in the workforce system to decentralize the tasks around planning so that they can really be closely tailored to local and regional labor markets and economies. There is no one-size-fits-all here. I would extend that principle of decentralization to workers themselves. I think that we need to be thinking about ways of putting resources into the hands of workers in order for them to make decisions about what's best for them and their families. And in terms of retraining and pursuing employment. So bottom line, decentralize the workforce system, decentralize authority, resources, and include workers in that decentralization.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Jolly's time has expired. Ms. Craig is recognized, coming to us online.
Thank you so much, Chairman Himes, for calling this amazing hearing today on technology and automation and its impact to the future. Welcome to our Republican colleagues. Given the important work of this committee, I'm so glad that our discussions moving forward are going to be done on a bipartisan basis. And a special welcome to my fellow congressional softball team members from the Republican side. Thank you to our witnesses today. Your testimony has helped us to better understand the challenges and opportunities that technology and automation will play in the future of work. As I listened to your testimony, I was reminded of the conversation from this committee's last hearing, which focused on the impacts of the American economy caused by globalization and shifts in manufacturing. It seems that regardless of how or why automation has assumed such a large role in American jobs, the future of American work will continue, in fact, in this direction of more and more service-based and care economy jobs. For example, Dr. Dubravik, you talked about future jobs being decidedly more human. And Mr. Earl, your testimony highlights how employers are increasingly prioritizing flexibility and interpersonal soft skills. One thing that jumps out to me as we consider the relationship between technology, automation, and the care economy is, of course, telehealth, virtual healthcare. I represent a district in southeastern Minnesota that's mostly rural, and during COVID-19, many of my constituents have relied on virtual healthcare to access their needs. Dr. Dubravik, I know you've done extensive work on digital connection and how data is playing an increasingly important role in the delivery of services across the country. I'm curious to see how you see these themes playing out in the healthcare sector.
I think, as you mentioned, clearly telehealth has a vital role moving forward. And when you look at the urban-rural divide, you still have a significant difference between the percentage of households that are taking advantage of telehealth in urban areas versus rural areas. By some estimates, it's 25 to 30% lower in rural areas. When you look at the divide between where physicians practice, you also see a pretty significant difference between rural and urban settings. The rural population is about 20% of the country, and only about 11% of physicians practice in rural areas. So you're already at a deficit there. And then you compound that by the fact that people who are in rural areas face much higher rates for some of the needs of healthcare. And so you've got this kind of dual burden that falls on those in rural areas. So, I think as you alluded to, things like rural broadband can help close that gap significantly. And I think it also helps drive some of the innovation more broadly that we have been talking about. As we move to a remote work environment and more employers support remote workers, some of those remote workers may opt to move into more rural settings, but they will need broadband in order to facilitate their jobs. If they do take what have historically been higher incomes into some of these rural areas, then we might start to see some of these trends reverse. We talk about patents in rural areas could increase if you have some of these professional workers working in these areas. So I think rural broadband can significantly move the needle, both for telehealth services, but also more broadly for the innovation that we want evenly distributed in different populations.
Real quick, I want to ask this of really any of the witnesses. You've talked more about sort of this idea of retraining to equip workers for the jobs that are going to be available in the future. But what about today? I've focused on apprenticeship programs. I'm the proud mother of a machinist who operates CNC machines. What role do you see apprenticeships and workforce development strategies playing, and of course, in the jobs for today as well?
I'm happy to answer that question quickly. Registered apprenticeships have an enormous contribution to make to these jobs. Also, recognizing, and the governors again are doing some work on this, and much more can be done at the federal level, recognizing the skills and capabilities people have from jobs they've been in before so that they can deploy those into the new jobs that are being created.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I think I'm just about out of time.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Kaplan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ranking Member Stile. I am thrilled to be serving on the Select Committee because I believe that the discussion, the debates, the testimony, and the work that we are here to do really highlights two very different approaches to American prosperity: capitalism and innovation versus big government, quite frankly, socialism. Possibly one of the most important discussions that we are going to have for our nation's future.
Now, I personally believe that our nation is based on equal opportunity, not equal outcome. And exactly what we're talking about here today, utilizing technology and innovation to drive more opportunities for growth in wages and upward mobility versus big government interference, red tape, and programs that suppress innovation and depress worker productivity. I represent a fairly rural district in north central Florida, go Gators, and that is a heavily agricultural district. So today, I would like to focus primarily on rural America and agriculture. I'd also like to think of ag as a bit of a microcosm of various industries kind of all wrapped up into one. On an ag operation, you'll find a need for technical skills like welding, mechanical skills to work on equipment, financial skills to balance the books and hopefully turn a profit, marketing skills to sell your product, and that's just a start. Now, before I jump in, I'd like to highlight that over the last 11 months, my team and I have offered 4 separate amendments in the House Agriculture Committee to redirect and focus on workforce development. In response, I have been called heartless and cruel for suggesting that we invest in workers and workforce development instead of welfare programs. Our ag economy and industry has struggled tremendously over the years, dealing with labor shortages and challenges with more government handouts contributing to more and more challenges. I have spoken with hundreds of producers who have been seeking out ways to automate in order to keep food on the table for everyday Americans. Now, this leads me to my first question for Mr. Orrell. Now, do you believe that automation in agriculture will in fact lead to more high-paying jobs and production and prosperity within agriculture today in America?
So this goes back to a remark that one of the other witnesses made, or I think it was actually one of the tape remarks. One of the benefits of automation that we don't always appreciate is the way that it takes over jobs that are extremely difficult physically to do. You look at a study that was done on West Virginia coal mining, and the counties with higher levels of coal employment had much higher levels of opioid addiction, in part because of the injuries that happen on the job and the way that the opioids then seep into the community as a result. So automation can help alleviate some of these, not just economic challenges, but also some of the social challenges that we face by moving away from work that is so physically demanding. I don't know enough about the ag economy, to tell you the truth, about how it's going to affect wages and opportunities. I will say that the ag economy, like every sector of the economy, the objective of workers should be to move up the value chain, away from routine tasks and toward tasks that require an integration of technical and non-cognitive skill sets, because that's where the fastest growth in wages are.
Well, and you hit right on something, talking about how automation can really help with some of the more social issues that we're combating. And one thing that I have heard repeatedly from producers in rural America for a very long time is the struggle of how can we encourage people to get back to work when we have a system in place that disincentivizes work. Currently, we have welfare programs that do not have a work requirement. How can we put an emphasis on workforce development and getting people back to work if there's no requirement?
We imposed work requirements as part of the TANF program in 1996 under the Clinton administration, and that has been, I think, in my view, unequivocally a success in terms of both increasing workforce participation and raising income among low-income Americans. That principle needs to be, we need to look at other programs where it's possible to apply that principle. Not every subsidy program that people receive is it possible to really craft a work requirement around it. But we need to be looking for opportunities to encourage work wherever we can. Having said all of that, I don't believe that at this moment in time, that's the principal problem that we're facing. I don't think that it's so much the expanded unemployment benefits or the stimulus. I think it really is a COVID problem in many ways. COVID affecting schools, COVID affecting other caregiving for workers so that they can get back to work. And the solution to the labor shortage right now really is about ending the pandemic.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. She can be assured that on this committee she will not be characterized as heartless and cruel, and Ms. Jacobs is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate my Republican friends even when we disagree on some of the issues. Mr. Orell, I wanted to start with you quickly. Just wanted to level set. You are the witness that the Republicans on the committee have invited. You work at a right-leaning think tank. And I just wanted to clarify that you said that one of the most important solutions to what we're talking about right now is childcare and early learning, and that the lack of childcare is one of the key contributors keeping people out of the workforce. Is that correct?
It is correct that in the poll that we conducted in June of unemployed workers, that care for children was one of the main things that workers said was keeping them out of the workforce.
And can you briefly elaborate on why early learning is fundamental to making sure we're preparing for a changing world of work?
Early learning is critical because it lays the foundation for all future learning. If we don't pay attention to that, I think we have we create more hurdles down the road. So yes, early learning. And I would say this isn't just formal education. I would say this is also about family formation, about not breaking the linkages of intergenerational learning between parents and children. That is a tough problem, and I believe that it is the fundamental basis of most of the other problems that we're encountering.
All right, so maybe also making the case for paid family leave. Great. Now I would like to turn to my next question. A lot of today's conversation has focused on the role of technology in job displacement, and I'd like to broaden the discussion because I actually think there are many ways that technology increase economic disparity, which is the purview of our committee, including through biased algorithms that screen people out from work or housing opportunities, extractive practices that create wealth from personal data. And as we see new innovations in AI, it's important to think about the policy innovations we need to keep pace with these changes. So, Dr. Acemoglu, how would you go about designing new foundational rules to ensure that tech innovations, including AI, operate for the public good and minimize rather than widen inequality?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I am really happy to see that you have put your finger on a very, very important part. I think the issues that we're talking about cannot be separated from the new data economy. And what really we do with data is at the heart of automation, is at the heart of consumer worker autonomy, and is also at the heart of new tasks that we can generate for workers of all backgrounds to be productively employed. And I think part of what you are hinting at is that the current way that data are being used is very unequal. Corporations, outside of the United States, governments also, but in the United States, mostly corporations have excessive power because they control data, and it's only a small number of corporations that do so, and often it is linked to very specific ways of monetizing data, for example, ad revenues in the case of social media, and also of internet searches and so on. So I think I don't think that the profession and policymakers have the exact framework for designing how we can better make use of data. But I think the main principles should be quite clear. We have to make use of data in such a way that empowers both corporations and workers and citizens. So at the moment, for example, if you use data in order to very tightly monitor employees in workplaces, warehouses, or in the context of delivery in such a way that worker autonomy is completely taken away, I think that's not a very productive way of using data, and it's a way of using data in order to shift rents or money from workers to corporations. In the same way, if you use data in such a way as to manipulate consumer preferences, I think that's not going to be a very productive way of using data. And I think all of these issues are central for how we can create an environment in which workers are going to be better able at building their own skills, their own talents. I think these issues.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted Dr. Dubravik, if you also had thoughts on this topic in my last 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, so I would argue that the last 20 years was all about digitizing our environments, and we saw kind of quick succession. We replaced all these analog products with digital ones. The next 20 years is going to be defined by data. We're moving to an environment where we're shifting from digitization to datification, and it is going to influence every aspect of our life. So, we heard a little bit of it, but I think we just scratched the surface of where data is going to go and how it's going to influence the decisions that are made.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ladies, time has expired. It appears that Mr. Donald is not with us. He'll be recognized if and when he returns. In the meantime, Mr. Gonzalez is recognized remotely for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to the chair and to the panel for being here on such an important subject. We're talking about automation. This is for Dr. Brody. Dr. Brody, could you elaborate on how investments in historically Black and brown colleges of minority-serving institutions can help mitigate the future effects of automation on workers, on communities like mine and districts like mine across the country, and what we could do to improve?
Yes, Thank you, Congressman. I want to give one example. As Dean of the College of Business at Dillard University, the UNCF gave us a $300,000 grant. We were able to use that money to partner with corporations to learn what students need to know and be able to do. So it's not just having employers come to job fairs. It's like the Brookings Institution talking to Dillard and Morgan and other HBCUs to say, this is what students need to do to be able to get an internship. This is what they need to be able to do to get an analyst job, so that we can start to prepare students for those jobs at the freshman year, not at the junior year when they're ready for an internship and we haven't properly prepared them. It means getting STATA, SPSS, Excel, and other things and actually training them for specific positions, not just thinking that we know, but for corporations to actually tell us, and hopefully getting more funding from the government and organizations like the UNCF to continue that work. Thank you.
Thank you. And so in other words, you're saying more partnerships between these institutions and business and the business world.
Absolutely. It's not just assuming that we know, or that when you see a job description that we know specifically what students should be able to do. It's telling us and working more closely from high school and from the early college level.
Could you elaborate a little bit on why you believe people of color are particularly susceptible to being adversely impacted by this automation that is here and that is still coming?
Yeah, so I think that if you look at the tax base, right, and the difference in education starting from Head Start, elementary school, high school, we see that Black schools are underfunded. Schools in Black neighborhoods are underfunded. We need to increase funding so that everyone can be equal. As the Congressman previously said, it should be about fairness, but fairness is properly funding schools so that students of different races get an equal opportunity to learn in order to be prepared for the future of work with automation.
That's right. And lastly, I certainly have to ask this question, is how is automation affecting women differently than men, as shown by numbers, particularly for women of color?
My research has shown that particularly Black and Latino women are overrepresented in positions that are at high risk of being automated. They're overrepresented in positions that were listed as essential and put them more at risk of getting COVID. So they've put themselves at risk of getting COVID-19 for a job that in the next 5 to 10 years may be automated. So we really need to focus on them. And we also know that African American women are overrepresented in HBCUs. We see more women than men. So funding HBCUs and MSIs means that those particular women will get the training that they need for jobs that are going to be available in the future.
Very well, that's right. Thank you. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I'll go to Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Is she with us remotely? Yeah. I'll give Mr. Donalds a couple more seconds here. The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. My apologies. It's always like that in the Capitol. Something's always happening. To the witnesses, I really want to thank you for being here, all of your testimonies. Let's cut straight to the chase. Doctor, pronounce your name again. I don't want to butcher it. Asamoglu. In your written statement, it's stated, and also in your testimony here, you stated the fact that bachelor degrees really only have limited gains to real earnings. But in your testimony here, you left out what was in your written statement that talks about if you have a postgraduate degree, that has actually experienced rapid wage growth. Can you tell the committee the differences that you've seen between just a baseline degree and people who have postgraduate degrees and what that means for real wages?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think this is really important to emphasize. If you look into the 1950s, 60s, early 70s, all demographic groups more or less are growing in tandem. But over the recent 4 decades, it's a very different pattern, exactly like you emphasized. Workers with postgraduate degrees, men with postgraduate degrees, are seeing very rapid growth in their real wages, but the rest of the demographic groups are essentially either flat or declining. So even men who have a college degree but no postgraduate degree are not experiencing great gains. And workers, especially men with high school degrees or less, are seeing declines as much as 20% in real terms in 3 decades or so.
Thank you,
really
Doctor.
striking.
Doctor, I don't want to cut you off because it's really cool, but I got like 3 minutes 30. There's a couple places I want to go. Dr. Brody, real quick, I know you've been focused in on HBCUs in particular with Black and Latino scholars. I went to an HBCU 3 years, Florida A&M, go Rattlers, and but I ended up graduating and finishing my college degree at Florida State University, go Noles. So I love both schools in Tallahassee. But what I want to see is, have you identified in your research any differentiation amongst the type of degrees that frankly students of color have been seeking and what that means with their economic outcomes in our economy?
Thank you, Congressman. So we know that students that major in the humanities and English and the social sciences are likely to earn less than those that major in business in the STEM fields. Now, of course, that's not overall. We know that students in English, some of them will earn more, but we want to see more students majoring in business and STEM fields because we know that those positions do earn more. I'm a business dean, a former business dean, so of course, that's what I'm going to lean towards. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and with the rest of the time, Chairman, and for the committee, the reason I kind of wanted to unpack that a little bit is because, when I got into the state legislature, one of the things I worked on was education policy in particular, and the data, as far as I was concerned, was pretty clear that we have 2 real issues. It is, number one, the baseline education that people in our country are receiving in the K-12 system, specifically Black students and Latino students, and frankly, poor white students, and the level of education they're receiving in K-12. Where we have saw in Florida in particular, and probably across the country, is the remediation rates in college algebra and college English for most students coming out of K-12 education are dramatically high. And it is actually on a minor instance that those remediation rates actually allow for students to progress when they get to higher education. Secondarily, and to a broader point, with respect to college debt in particular, but also your ability to navigate the working world, what I've seen and what I've seen from a lot of my peers from many years is that depending on the degree track you go down, determines where you start in our economy and then your ability to progress. And so students, like you mentioned, Dr. Brody, who sought the humanities or English or whatever the case might be, did not have a degree that yielded economic viability in our economy. And those students, unfortunately, were lied to. They were just told, get a degree. But the reality is the degree you seek yields an economic viability in our economy, especially with respect to innovation and where innovation is going to take our economy to the places nobody in this panel, frankly, has any idea where innovation is really going to take us. So I think what we need to be focused on in part with respect to innovation and the future of work is making sure that our students are academically prepared in K-12 and that them and their parents are educated on the reality of the economic viability of the higher education degrees they're going to seek and or the job training they're going to engage in when they're in K-12, whether it's HVAC, auto mechanics, construction, electrical engineering, electricians, all of those jobs that actually yield to a high level of wages at a very early age without having to take on the massive amount of debts associated with higher education, especially if you go to a private university versus an HBCU or a state university like I did. So with that, I yield back. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Moment time has expired. The gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Himes, for hosting this hearing, and thank you to all of our witnesses for sharing your expertise. During our last committee hearing, I dug into some misleading economic narratives that tend to inform major policy decisions. And this is because I believe it's very important that we diagnose these problems correctly, because if we tell a story that is primarily about something like the skills gap, we are saying that policy's primary role is fostering skill development as opposed to reining in corporate power and boosting the power that workers have in our economy. Now, in that hearing, Dr. Spriggs testified that the United States automated our manufacturing sector in response to Japanese competition, but we kept the same number of workers for almost 20 years. As productivity went through the roof, the UAW was also able to negotiate higher wages. Now, Dr. Brody, would you say that unionized workers in highly automatable industries have higher employment stability?
Yes.
Now, would you also say that these same workers have a reduced risk of low earnings?
Yes.
So you would agree that it is essential for unions to negotiate the transition for workers as industries automate?
Yes.
Thank you. As mentioned in our previous hearing, Germany has had nearly 5 times as many robots per worker than we do, and they have had very different labor market outcomes. It is clear that the experience of automation is different for workers that are unionized versus those that are not. Those that are able to exercise their collective bargaining rights are better able to negotiate the transition in automation. But I want to shift now to discussing something that is often not talked about, but is a byproduct of technological innovation in the workplace, and that is workplace surveillance. Technology is increasingly exploited by employers to pay workers less, ignore worker protections, and undermine bargaining ability, which ultimately increases economic inequality and distorts economic growth. Dr. Acemoglu, are workers likely to know all of the ways in which they are surveilled, and what mechanisms presently exist for them to push back on that?
There is no way that at the moment they can know all of the ways in which they are surveyed, because a lot of it depends on data that's very non-transparent. And I think at the moment there is not much that workers can do. Unionization could partially help, but obviously new unions are not forthcoming in most establishments at the moment.
So to clarify, workers are currently being surveilled without their full knowledge in their own workplaces?
To some extent, yes.
I want to demonstrate how insidious this can get. Service jobs use technologies like Dayforce to calculate wages for paychecks in real time and turn away workers from scheduled shifts when sales are down. This unpredictable scheduling makes it hard for workers to earn a reliable wage and even enables employer wage theft, which is one of the largest forms of theft in the United States. But it does not stop there. They use technology to make hiring and firing decisions as well. These algorithms designed to favor the firm give employers more power and employees less control at work. So Dr. Asamoglu, do you believe that the increased incidence of workplace surveillance are likely to exacerbate existing economic disparities?
Absolutely, yes, because most of the time that type of surveillance is directed at low education workers in service jobs.
And so what we're really seeing is how technology is being harnessed to really make some of the existing inequities in our workplaces worse. If, for example, when I worked back at my restaurant, when I worked at the restaurant, you could often see forms of employer retaliation or employer inconsistencies, I shall say, where you could have 5 full shifts one week and you're expected to clear your entire calendar, and you could have 2 shifts the next week, but you still need to pay your rent at the end of the month. So we're seeing how these areas of surveillance can exacerbate some of these existing inequalities. Are there any other areas that you would point to?
I think if you look at a lot of the transport sector delivery jobs, there's a lot of surveillance, and it's going to increase with the amount of data. And as you pointed out, it's partly or largely an issue of corporate power. So one way of balancing how we use data in a way that's more productive is actually also balancing how much protection workers have.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. Fascinating topic, probably lots to follow up on. I want to observe as chairman that the part I liked best was that Mr. Orell, as the Republican invited witness, you made the case that extended UI is perhaps not the biggest problem we face and made a case for child care. Professor Asamoglu, as a Democratic invited witness, you suggested that maybe minimum wage creates pressure to automate and therefore against labor. Those are uncomfortable moments for those of us up here, but maybe the motto of this committee could be discomfort on our part in pursuit of good ideas for the American people. So I want to thank you for your testimony today. Without objection, all members will have 10 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 10 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I remind members that written questions and materials for the record should be submitted to the email address provided to your offices. With that, the hearing is adjourned.